What inspires a man to risk everything for freedom, even when the odds seem impossible? This is the story of William Wallace, a name etched in history as the symbol of Scotland's fight for independence. In the 13th century, the Scottish Highlands were a land gripped by fear under English rule. Amid this oppression, Wallace, born of humble beginnings, rose to defy tyranny. His courage and resolve transformed him into a beacon of hope for a divided nation. Wallace united Scotland not just through battle, but with his vision for a free future. His relentless fight came at a great cost, yet his sacrifice inspired a nation and left a legacy of courage that continues to endure. In the late 13th century, Scotland was a kingdom in turmoil, fractured by internal rivalries and smothered by the encroaching power of England. Once a proud nation, it now struggled to maintain its independence under the looming shadow of Edward I's growing influence. The clans, though fiercely loyal to their land, were divided, powerless against the might of the English crown. The death of King Alexander III in 1286 plunged Scotland into a deep uncertainty. With no clear successor to the throne, the kingdom descended into the Great Cause, a bitter and bloody power struggle. Edward I, ever the opportunist, positioned himself as the kingmaker, supporting lords loyal to him and tightening England's chokehold on Scotland. For the common folk, every day was a battle for survival. The land they had tilled for generations had become a source of torment as heavy English taxes drained their meager resources. The sight of foreign soldiers patrolling their villages, their heavy boots grinding the soil they once worked with pride, only deepened the resentment that simmered beneath the surface. Clan rivalries that once divided them began to fade as the weight of English oppression united them under one unspoken cause: the dream of freedom. By 1292, Scotland's unity had been shattered, but its spirit was far from broken. The people, weary and oppressed, longed for a leader, someone to rise above the divisions and rally them against the foreign rule. Hope flickered like a dying ember, yet amid the cold darkness, a spark began to grow, a spark that would soon ignite into a fierce blaze of rebellion. In the midst of the chaos and uncertainty, one man would rise, not by chance, but because Scotland's soul demanded it. William Wallace would become the embodiment of resistance, courage, and the unyielding desire for freedom that would not be extinguished. His name would echo through the centuries, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of defiance against oppression, inspiring generations to come. William Wallace was born around 1270 in the village of Elderslie in Renfrewshire. His family belonged to the lesser nobility, but lived without great wealth. Growing up, Wallace was exposed to the realities of life in Scotland during a time of increasing unrest. Little is documented about his early years, but his upbringing reflected the traditions and values of the time. He likely learned skills such as horsemanship, hunting, and the use of arms. Wallace's education may have also included some instruction in Latin and law, though much of his learning came from his surroundings and his family's guidance. It's often said that the fiercest fires are sparked by the smallest flames. For William Wallace, that flame was lit in 1285, when Scotland stood at the brink of change and English control tightened its grip. It was the year his father, Sir Malcolm Wallace, was murdered by Edward I's forces, and their lands were seized. Sir Malcolm had been a steadfast defender of Scottish independence, and his death left William with more than just the loss of a father. The brutal execution and the theft of his family's lands marked the beginning of his resolve, a burning desire for justice and retribution. As a young boy, William could do nothing but watch helplessly as the invaders took everything from him. The grief of losing his father was compounded by the burning anger of injustice. His childhood ended that day, replaced by a resolve that would drive him for the rest of his life. The boy who had once been powerless became a man with a singular purpose: to avenge his father and strike back at the forces that had torn his world apart. This loss ignited a fire within him. It became a relentless, consuming urge to defend Scotland and challenge the English. Every injustice, every reminder of his father's death fueled his determination. By 1291, Wallace was no longer just a boy consumed by grief. He was a man ready for action. The oppressive presence of the English had left the people of Scotland in despair, but they lacked a leader. William saw this as his moment. Sheriff Heselrig, an English enforcer notorious for his cruelty, had long terrorized the Scottish people. But for Wallace, Heselrig was more than just a symbol of English tyranny. He was the final straw. In a swift and brutal ambush, Wallace and his band of rebels killed the sheriff, sending a powerful message that Scotland would no longer bow to foreign rule. This act of resistance wasn't just personal revenge, it was a declaration of war. Wallace's strike against the sheriff reverberated far beyond the bloodshed. It sparked a movement as Scots from every corner of the land rallied to his cause. William Wallace was no longer just a son seeking justice for his father. He had become the face of a revolution, the flame that would lead Scotland's fight for freedom. On September 11, 1297, the fate of Scotland teetered on a knife's edge. The English army, led by the overconfident Sir Hugh de Cressingham, advanced towards Stirling, certain that their overwhelming numbers would crush the Scottish rebellion once and for all. But they had gravely underestimated one man, William Wallace. Now, with his ally Andrew Moray, he faced an enemy 3 times his size. Their odds seemed impossible, yet Wallace saw what the English had missed: the land itself. As the English army neared Stirling Bridge, the sound of their march echoed in the cool autumn air. The men of Wallace's army lay hidden, tense but resolute, knowing that their moment had come. The narrow bridge ahead, a simple crossing in the eyes of the English, held a powerful secret. Wallace and Moray knew that only a few soldiers could cross at once, rendering the English numbers useless. It was the perfect trap. Wallace's plan was deceptively simple. He would bait the English into crossing the bridge, where they would be trapped, their superior numbers no longer an advantage. The Scots, positioned on higher ground, would strike when the time was right. The first wave of English soldiers took the bait. As they stepped onto the bridge, Wallace gave the signal. From the hills above, arrows, spears, and stones rained down, devastating the English as they struggled to advance. Panic spread like wildfire through their ranks, confusion turning to chaos. The narrow bridge, once thought to be their path to victory, had become a death trap. With nowhere to retreat and unable to maneuver, the English soldiers were easy targets. Wallace's forces, charging with unyielding fury, cut through the disarray, overwhelming the trapped soldiers. The sight of the English scrambling, helpless on the bridge, was a testament to the brilliance of Wallace's tactics and to the crumbling might of the English invaders. What had begun as a battle for survival quickly turned into a rout. The English were pushed back across the river, their retreat a desperate scramble to escape, leaving behind the wreckage of their once unstoppable army. Against all odds, Wallace and Moray had achieved an astounding victory. But this battle was more than a military triumph. It was a moment that would ignite the heart of a nation. Stirling Bridge was not just a victory over the English, it was a declaration that Scotland would not bow to foreign rule. Wallace's name spread like wildfire, inspiring Scots from every corner of the land, and his victory became a beacon of hope, a promise that freedom was still possible. In England, the news of Stirling Bridge sent shockwaves through the court of Edward I. The king, once confident in his grip over Scotland, was now forced to confront the true threat Wallace represented. The battle had shattered any illusion that the rebellion could be easily crushed. Wallace, once a lone figure, had now become the symbol of Scottish resistance. Yet, For Wallace, victory was not without its weight. The cheers of his men echoed in his ears, but the reality of the long and perilous road ahead hung over him. Stirling Bridge was a significant victory, but it was just one chapter in an ongoing struggle. Wallace knew that this was only the beginning. Every battle fought, every victory claimed, would come at a heavy cost. The fight for Scotland's freedom was far from over. For Scotland, the victory at Stirling Bridge was the spark of a revolution. It reminded them that, though the path to independence was fraught with danger, they had the strength to fight back. Wallace had given them hope, but he also knew that hope alone would not win their freedom. The road ahead would be long, and the price of independence high. But Stirling Bridge had shown the Scots one undeniable truth. Their fight for freedom was far from over, and with Wallace leading them, it was a fight they could win. Although the victory at Stirling Bridge had temporarily united the Scottish people, the fractures within the kingdom remained. The shadow of English dominance still loomed large. Wallace's appointment as Guardian of Scotland in the aftermath of Stirling Bridge thrust him into the heart of the struggle. Alongside Andrew Moray and other leaders, he was charged with navigating the complex political terrain and guiding Scotland toward full independence. The victory had been momentous, but Wallace understood that it was merely the beginning of a much longer, more difficult war. With new responsibility came new challenges. Though his victory at Stirling Bridge had united many in spirit, Scotland's internal divisions were undeniable. Clan loyalties often trumped national unity, and many Scottish nobles, wary of following a commoner, hesitated to place their trust in Wallace. The political landscape was constantly shifting, and every move he made was subject to the ever-present threat of betrayal. But Wallace was relentless. He traveled across the country, speaking to the hearts of common folk and leaders alike. His words stirred the memories of oppression that burned in every Scot's heart and ignited a fierce resolve to continue the fight. Through his passionate speeches, Wallace began to weave together a tapestry of unity. Each clan, each region, understanding that their survival depended on standing together. The people began to see that their future was not just in the hands of noble families or feudal lords, but in their own. Wallace knew, however, that military might alone could not win the war. He worked tirelessly to form alliances with Scotland's fractured leadership. Yet, in a land where loyalty was often dictated by land, power, and personal gain, his efforts were fraught with difficulty. Wallace found himself walking a tightrope, trying to secure alliances with nobles who were as fickle as they were powerful. Every alliance he forged was fragile, and the weight of potential betrayal was always present. But he continued, knowing that the future of Scotland rested not just on his ability to fight, but on his ability to unite. Through it all, Wallace's resolve never faltered. For him, this struggle was more than just about military victories. It was a fight to secure a future for Scotland, one free from the English yoke. Every speech he delivered, every leader he convinced, and every battle he fought brought him one step closer to that goal. But as Scotland's symbol of resistance, Wallace knew that his path was a lonely one, filled with sacrifice and uncertainty. After the stunning victory at Stirling Bridge, William Wallace became a beacon of hope and defiance, a symbol of Scotland's fight for freedom. But the road ahead would prove far from simple. Despite their triumph, Scotland remained fractured, and English dominance still loomed large. Wallace had ignited the flame of resistance, but now he had to keep it burning. On July 22, 1298, Wallace's journey reached a critical crossroads at the Battle of Falkirk. His forces, emboldened by past victories, now faced the full might of King Edward III's army, a force determined to crush the Scottish rebellion once and for all. The clash that ensued would not just be a test of military might, but of strategy, unity, and betrayal. Wallace's decision to fight on open ground was a costly one. In earlier battles, his guerrilla tactics had used the terrain as a weapon, but the flat fields of Falkirk offered no such advantage. The English cavalry, massive and heavily armored, dominated the open landscape. Wallace's infantry, though fiercely determined, was no match for the brutal force of the English knights and the deadly accuracy of the longbowmen. Why he chose this battlefield remains a point of debate. Was it arrogance, misjudgment, or simply a lack of better options? Whatever the reason, the Scots found themselves at a disadvantage before the first sword was drawn. But the battle's greatest blow came not from the English, but from Wallace's own ranks. As the fighting intensified, several Scottish nobles who had pledged their loyalty to Wallace betrayed him in the heat of battle. At a critical moment, they abandoned their posts and fled. This betrayal fractured the army and shattered the morale of those who remained. Wallace, who had always known that loyalty among the nobles was fragile, could never have anticipated the sting of such treachery in a moment of such importance. The battle ended in a crushing defeat for the Scots. Wallace was forced into retreat, and for the first time in his campaign, the dream of an independent Scotland seemed beyond reach. The psychological toll of the defeat was as severe as the military loss. Wallace, once the embodiment of unyielding courage, now found himself questioning his ability to lead. Falkirk had been a devastating blow, not just to the Scottish army, but to the very spirit of the rebellion. In the aftermath, Wallace made the painful decision to step down as Guardian of Scotland. Faced with deepening divisions and a fractured leadership, he realized he could no longer rally the country in the way he once had. The war for freedom would continue, but without Wallace's direct command. It was a humbling moment for a man who had once believed he could lead Scotland to freedom by sheer force of will. Yet, while Falkirk dealt a blow to Wallace's leadership, it did not mark the end of the struggle. His name continued to inspire those who refused to submit to English rule. The defeat at Falkirk was a setback, but the fire that Wallace had ignited within the hearts of the Scottish people would not be extinguished. Though he had stepped away from the leadership, the cause of Scotland's independence remained strong. The path ahead remained uncertain, and Scotland's fight for freedom would be long and costly. But Wallace's legacy endured, a reminder to all that the dream of a free Scotland was worth any sacrifice. The battle for independence would continue, with or without him, and the story of Wallace would echo through the generations as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. After the devastating loss at Falkirk, Wallace and his dwindling forces retreated into the rugged highlands, a landscape as untamed as the man himself. Though broken, Wallace refused to yield. Over the next few years, he became a phantom in the night, haunting the English with swift raids and relentless strikes. By torchlight, the English garrisons would burn, leaving only the echo of his fury in the dark. Wallace's name spread like wildfire, both a beacon of hope for the Scots and a growing nightmare for King Edward I. Edward understood that to capture Wallace would be to break the heart of the Scottish rebellion. Yet, despite his fame, Wallace remained a shadow, untouchable, elusive, a figure almost as mythic as he was mortal. The more his legend grew, the harder it became for him to stay hidden. He was a blur in the mist, a whisper on the wind. In one such attack, Wallace and his men ambushed an English convoy. As flames engulfed the night, his voice rang out, sharp and defiant. "This is our land, let them remember it." But the years of evasion took their toll. Wallace, once the embodiment of invincibility, was no longer the same. The weight of isolation and constant pursuit began to wear on him. The fire that had once burned so brightly seemed to flicker in the face of mounting pressure. For a man who had led an army with unwavering certainty, doubt began to creep in. The constant strain of leadership and the isolation of the Highlands left him questioning if his dream of a free Scotland was slipping beyond his reach. Yet it wasn't just the English who were a threat. Betrayal, that ever-present shadow, stalked him from within. The same nobles who had once pledged their loyalty now whispered among themselves, torn between their allegiances and their ambitions. And in 1305, Wallace would learn just how fragile loyalty could be. The end of his fight came not in battle, but in a moment of crushing betrayal. Sir John de Menteith, a Scottish nobleman and once a trusted ally, turned on Wallace, delivering him into the hands of the English. For a man who had eluded capture for so long, the betrayal was a devastating blow, not just to his body, but to his spirit. Wallace, who had trusted in the unity of his people, now faced the harsh reality that Scotland's cause was not immune to division. When Wallace was captured, it sent shockwaves through the land. The English rejoiced, but for the Scots, his capture was more than a military defeat. It was a profound loss. Wallace, once the symbol of their fight, was now imprisoned. But his name did not die. Far from it. His capture only made him a martyr, a symbol of sacrifice and resistance. The fire he had ignited in Scotland could not be extinguished, and his name continued to inspire the rebels who would carry the fight forward. Though Wallace's direct resistance had come to an end, his legacy was far from over. His death would become the spark that reignited Scotland's struggle for independence. His martyrdom, his unwavering commitment to a free Scotland, served as the rallying cry for those who would not give up the fight. And though the road ahead was long, Wallace's sacrifice ensured that the spirit of resistance burned brighter than ever before. In the autumn of 1305, after years of defying English rule, William Wallace was finally captured. His trial in London was not merely a legal proceeding, it was a public spectacle, carefully orchestrated by King Edward I to crush the spirit of Scottish rebellion. Wallace, shackled but unbowed, stood before the court facing charges of treason and insurrection. But to Wallace, there was no treason in his actions. He had never sworn allegiance to Edward and fought only to defend his homeland. When accused of betraying the English crown, Wallace responded with unflinching clarity. "I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject." These words, spoken in the face of certain death, became his final declaration, a resolute rejection of England's authority over Scotland. His defiance was not just an act of personal conviction, but a bold statement of Scotland's right to self-determination. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was sentenced to death. Dragged through the streets of London, pelted with stones and jeers, his body bore the pain of the crowd's hatred, but his spirit remained unbroken. Every step toward the execution site was a testament to his unwavering resolve. At the scaffold, Wallace is said to have whispered a single word: freedom. This was no mere plea or prayer. It was the essence of everything he had fought for, a final act of defiance that echoed louder than the crowd's condemnation. The manner of Wallace's execution was deliberately brutal. Drawn and quartered in a gruesome display, his body was dismembered, with his limbs sent to different corners of the kingdom as a warning to others who might dare to resist. But instead of silencing the Scots, his death ignited a new wave of defiance. Wallace's execution became a powerful symbol of resistance, his sacrifice a rallying cry that reverberated across Scotland. Though Wallace's life ended on that scaffold, his legacy endured. His unyielding courage inspired a movement that would culminate in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, where Robert the Bruce led Scotland to a decisive victory. Wallace's relentless pursuit of freedom had laid the groundwork for this triumph, providing a foundation for Bruce and others to build upon. Even in death, Wallace remained a beacon for the Scottish cause. His story spread not just as a tale of rebellion, but as a reminder that the fight for freedom often demands the ultimate sacrifice. His execution, intended to extinguish hope, instead fanned the flames of resistance and became a defining moment in Scotland's history. Wallace was not merely a man condemned to die. He was a symbol of unrelenting defiance, a voice for those who refused to be subjugated. His martyrdom was not an end but a beginning, ensuring that the dream of an independent Scotland would live on. For generations, his name would inspire those who sought justice and self-determination, reminding them that freedom was a cause worth any price. William Wallace's brief life ignited a flame that still burns in Scotland's fight for freedom. His courage and sacrifice inspire generations, reminding us that standing for what's right can spark change. Wallace's legacy isn't just history, it's woven into the spirit of Scotland itself. Enjoyed Wallace's story? Subscribe for more documentaries on legendary figures and explore the rich history that shaped a nation. Check out our other videos and join us in learning from the past.